Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome, everyone, to a deep dive into the thrilling and sometimes pretty unsettling world of survival horror video games.
Mm,
We've got a whole stack of sources here, articles on upcoming games, lots of community chatter, even some research into the psychology behind why we love being scared.
or endure being scared, maybe.
All right. So our mission today is basically to cut through all that noise, pull out the key insights, and get you up to speed fast on where survival horror is at, why 2025 feels like such a big year, and yeah, what makes these games get under our skin.
It really is a fascinating time for the genre. You look at the sources, and it's clear we're past just a simple resurgence.
Right.
2025 is, well, it's shaping up to be a landmark year, taking things to a whole new level, as one source put it.
A level with a staggering number of games,
Yeah.
according to that survivalhorrors.com article, and they only highlighted 10 key ones. There's apparently a much bigger list for 2025.
Yeah, staggering feels about right.
And, as the article points out, the year's already kicked off. We've already seen Dead of Darkness, The Mute House, Blood Typers, Mansion of the Dead, Post Trauma,
Right.
all landing already, setting a pretty frantic pace for what's coming.
That first wave just shows the momentum, doesn't it? Leading right into 2025. And yet, well, we'll definitely talk about some of those really promising games on that list. A huge amount of the talk, the anticipation, maybe even the arguments online seem to circle around one game in particular, IL.
Oh, absolutely. We've gathered quite a bit on that one. Got insights from Game Informer, Jamatsu, PC Game Zen, DeSo Gaming. Looked at Reddit threads, YouTube comments, even an 80-level piece on its development.
Yeah.
It's clearly become a sort of flashpoint, hasn't it, for what people think is possible versus what seems, too good to be true.
Definitely. And to really get why any of these games land, why they stick with you beyond just a jump scare, we need to bring in those ideas from the Cubix article, the one on the psychology of horror game design. It really helps explain the how and why from both the developers and the player side.
Perfect. So, okay, the genre's been resurgent for a bit, but what makes 2025 the year it hits this whole new level? What are the trends we're seeing in these sources?
Well, the sheer volume is one trend, obviously. It suggests a really healthy market, maybe even booming, that's encouraging developers, big studios and small indies alike, to jump in.
Makes sense. More demand, more games.
But it's not just quantity. The sources really highlight the diversity. We're not just getting carbon copies. We're seeing games mastering old formulas, pushing tech boundaries, or blending genres in ways that feel genuinely, well, new.
That diversity really jumps out when you look at that survival horrors list, doesn't it? It's definitely not one-size-fits-all horror. You've got games looking way back, games aiming for the future, and some just doing their own weird, interesting thing.
Exactly. You can kind of group them, maybe.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have titles that are really reverent towards classic survival horror. Thinking games like Tormented Souls 2, Echoes of the Living, and maybe Flesh Made Fear.
Tormented Souls 2, yeah, that's a great example. The first one really nailed that modern Resident Evil remake feel, didn't it?
It did.
And the sequel, based on what the publisher's putting out in the sources, it sounds like it's scaling up massively, over 3 times bigger, targeting 20-plus hours of gameplay, 9 locations.
Yeah, the scale sounds huge.
Yep.
And they mentioned, 11 makeshift weapons, 6 bosses, 11 new enemy types. It suggests the devs are pretty confident that players want that big, meaty, single-player horror experience again.
Kind of like those old PS1, PS2 games that you could really sink your teeth into.
Exactly. Lots of replayability, hopefully.
And Echoes of the Living takes that retro love maybe even a step further. It's explicitly called a love letter to 90s survival horror, specifically that urban zombie outbreak, Raccoon City kind of feel.
And what's really interesting there is a story behind it. It's a husband and wife team, Moonflint, doing it full-time.
Wow.
And the structure they're going for 3 distinct campaigns designed to feel almost like separate games. Different characters, enemies, areas, puzzles.
That's incredibly ambitious for a small team.
It really is. It shows the kind of passion driving some of this resurgence, even if it means taking a lot longer to develop.
That really speaks volumes about dedication. And Flesh Made Fear also seems to be tapping right into that PS1 nostalgia, promising uncompromising survival horror.
And the fact it got funded on Kickstarter so fast, like under 48 hours, the source says that's a huge market signal, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Players are actively hungry for that specific experience. Limited saves, zombies, maybe even tank controls, fixed cameras, those cryptic puzzles.
And the premise sounds classic, too, hunting some deranged ex-CIA guy called Victor the Dripper.
Yeah, exactly. Combine that with brutal combat and 2 playable characters, it's clearly aimed squarely at people missing that really challenging, resource-tight kind of horror.
Okay, so you've got these games, looking back, kind of perfecting or expanding those classic formulas. But then, like you said, there are others really experimenting, pushing the boundaries.
Tenebris Somnia is probably the prime example there. It's a 2D survival horror game, which immediately makes you go, huh? It challenges definitions. The source even mentions purists debating if it counts.
Which is interesting in itself, right? Pushing back on what the genre has to be. And it's got that really unique mix. Retro pixel art, gameplay, NSAMOCOM style, classic mechanics. But then it switches, jarringly, to live-action cutscenes with professional actors.
Yeah, that collision of styles seems to be its whole identity. It uses nostalgia in the gameplay, but does something completely different with the presentation. It shows developers are willing to get eclectic, mix things up.
And New Blood Interactive publishing it makes sense. They often pick up those kinds of unique indie titles.
Definitely fits their style.
Heartworm is another one doing a bit of mixing and matching. It's got the Resident Evil fixed cameras and PS1 look.
Right.
But the core mechanic is like Fatal Frame, using a camera as your weapon.
Yeah, but the source makes a point that it's not just copying, it's adding its own flavor with these surreal, dreamlike, almost Lovecraftian environments, different from, say, the original Alone in the Dark.
Okay.
And apparently there's a focus on good voice acting, especially the main character, Sam, trying to add some real emotional depth, using familiar pieces, but aiming for a distinct mood.
Fragile Reflection sounds maybe the most experimental or niche. Rural Japan, no masks, this reflection realm, and that soundtrack mention was interesting.
Yeah, the article author was really excited about the Madjaw soundtrack, described it as, dark textured underground trip-hop or side trip.
Something like that.
The fact that the music was highlighted as a major draw is telling. It shows how much atmosphere and sound design, even non-traditional music, can be the hook for a horror game, maybe just as much as the visuals or mechanics.
And it still has classic late 90s gameplay, apparently, with puzzles and dimension hopping, anchoring the weirdness in something familiar. And then SSR Wives, The Murder of My Winter Crush. I mean, that title alone.
Yeah, it screams unique blend, doesn't it?
Totally.
It sounds like a really fascinating mix. Classic survival horror gameplay, but blended with visual novel storytelling.
Okay.
So lots of focus on mystery, player choice, dialogue that has layers, multiple endings, suggests a real depth to the narrative, maybe more than some pure action horror games.
And blending romance and horror, that's unusual.
Very. And the trailer music was mentioned as being mysterious and dreamlike. Seems like it's really leaning into mood and story intrigue.
Then you have The Lacerator, which just sounds like it's experimenting by cranking everything way up. 80s-inspired gore, sex, satire.
Yeah, its core ideas are definitely experimental. The premise, obviously, but also that dynamic limb loss mechanic. Lose a limb, you'll adapt.
That sounds intense.
Right. Taking a horror trope, body horror, and making it a core gameplay mechanic that changes how you play. It's exploring how far you can push that, while still having the traditional exploration, traps, puzzles, limited resources, and you can play it fixed camera or over the shoulder.
Giving options. Big Crown sounds like it's going for a mix too, but maybe more psychological depth alongside the mechanics.
Yeah, that seems right. It uses classic survival horror stuff, resource management, cryptic puzzles, but pairs it with a psychological story where your decisions actually matter, shape the world.
The source compared its atmosphere to classic Silent Hill. That's a high bar.
It is. It suggests a real focus on that mental dread, not just physical threats. And they mention unforgiving combat, needing different strategies for enemies, boss battles, exploring this huge castle, and a nightmarescape.
Sounds like a big undertaking.
Yeah, the source called it a 3+ year passion project, suggesting a good level of polish.
Okay, lastly from that list, Chronos, The New Dawn. The survival horror's author seemed a bit on the fence about calling it pure survival horror.
And that's the interesting point the source raises. It highlights that blurry line, the debate around the genre's edges.
Right.
It apparently has some survival elements, resource scarcity maybe, narrative depth, hopefully. But the emphasis seems to be on tactical combat, Soul extraction, time manipulation,
So more action-oriented.
potentially. The author wondered if it drifts more into action horror. It just shows there's a spectrum, you know. And marketing labels don't always capture the exact mechanical balance. The hope expressed was that it does lean into the survival stuff enough to be a really standout, action-leaning survival horror title.
Okay, so the genre isn't just making a comeback. It's really diversifying. We've got games honoring the classics, games experimenting like crazy blurring lines.
Exactly.
And then sort of standing out, maybe a bit apart from those trends, is ILL, which the sources suggest is pushing technical boundaries more than maybe anything else on the horizon.
That's where diving into those IL-specific sources really gets interesting. Yeah, it's a first-person survival horror from Team Cloud, being published under Mundfish Powerhouse. That's the new imprint from the Atomic Heart devs.
Right, Atomic Heart.
It got revealed at Summer Game Fest 2025 and just, boom, grabbed everyone's attention.
The setting sounds creepy enough. Dark, abandoned research fort, maybe a sinister settlement taken over by something mysterious.
Yeah, classic setup. But the sources spend so much time talking about how it's being made. The technical ambition is front and center.
Unreal Engine 5, promising disturbingly realistic horrors, intense body horror.
And that dismemberment system gets mentioned everywhere. It sounds core to the experience. Visceral, monsters mutilated, torn apart. You see ripped flesh, bones, organs. And apparently the gameplay encourages you to interact with this system, explore it.
So it's more than just gore, it's almost a mechanic itself. And the physics too, the sources emphasize realistic physics, making the environment dynamic.
Yeah, objects aren't just glued down. Rooms supposedly change after fights. The environment isn't just scenery, it's part of the gameplay, the tension.
And the enemies sound different too, not just your standard zombies.
No, they're described as dynamic, unpredictable. They react uniquely depending on where you hit them. Specific animations, apparently disturbingly human-like reflexes.
Okay, that's unsettling.
And the director even hinted that maybe new enemies could be born from limbs that get blown off.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's genuinely horrific. Ties right into the body horror thing.
Totally. And the weapon system also gets a lot of focus in the sources. Elaborate animations, needing maintenance.
Like checking for malfunctions.
Yeah, exactly. Modifications, upgrades, different ammo types. It all points towards a really tactical layer. Inventory management, resource gathering, not just checking boxes, but critical moment-to-moment gameplay.
And they're aiming for deep immersion too, right?
Yeah.
With the audio.
Big time. They're using a binaural audio system. The goal is apparently you feel the agony in every scream. You can pinpoint sounds in space, like knowing a gunshot is actually down the corridor.
Immersion is key in horror.
Absolutely. And all this tech is meant to support a narrative-driven story, uncovering what caused all the madness.
The development story itself adds a lot of context, especially for the community reaction. It started small, right? Around 2021, just 4 core developers.
Yeah, and those early videos were more like concept pieces. Some were even set in different places, like a small American town, not the Eastern Bloc fort setting they have now.
And to fund it, they did freelance work, VFX for horror films.
Yeah, some pretty big ones too, like VHS Beyond, Long Legs, the IT prequel series. The sources say that experience brought a cinematic edge and real horror know-how to the game dev process.
That's a cool crossover, using film experience for game design.
Definitely. And then things apparently really picked up steam, got real momentum in summer 2023. That's when they partnered with Mundfish Powerhouse, got funding
And the team grew.
significantly to around 50 full-time developers. And crucially, the sources are pretty clear that the footage we've seen since 2023 is captured in-game.
That's an important clarification.
It is. And the director, Max Veronine, mentioned inspirations like Half-Life 2 for pacing and story.
Okay.
Fear and Soldier of Fortune for the physics, and the gore excitement, as he put it. It gives you a sense of the mix they're aiming for. Narrative, interactive environments, visceral action.
And the level design, balancing big open areas with tight corridors.
Yeah, trying to give you space to explore, but also keep that dreadful, isolating atmosphere, alternate paths, things like that. Classic survival horror structure, really.
Finding that balance seems key. Enough room to breathe, but not so much you feel safe.
Exactly. Provide discovery, but maintain claustrophobia.
Okay, so here's where the community reaction comes in, which the sources really highlight. There's this massive tension around CLL. Despite how amazing it looks, how ambitious it sounds, there's a lot of skepticism.
Oh, yeah. You look through those Reddit threads, YouTube comments, the same phrases pop up again and again. Too good to be true, vaporware, sometimes just straight up fake gameplay.
And it's not totally out of nowhere, is it? It comes from those super polished early concept videos from a tiny team.
Right.
The long development time before 2023 with not many updates, and just how incredibly good the recent trailers look. People compare it to games like Body Cam or Unrecord.
Or even Atomic Heart itself, which had its own discussions about trailers versus the final game.
Yeah, specific things people point out, like the camera movement sometimes looking too smooth, almost scripted, like it lingers on a kicked can or perfectly frames something falling.
Yeah. The cinematic feel sometimes reads as not real gameplay to some viewers. And the animation quality people question if a team that size, even 50 people, can hit that AAA level of fidelity consistently.
And some commenters bring up the team's past work, sometimes described as mobile games or early interviews where they said they were just learning Unreal.
Yeah, that history gets scrutinized. Even the name, Team Clout, gets picked apart by a few people, suggesting it sounds like maybe they're more about hype than delivery. It's rough.
It's definitely a perception battle, but there are counter-arguments in the sources too. Mundfish being involved as publisher gives it some weight for some people. External validation, funding.
Although, like you said, the Atomic Heart comparison cuts both ways there for some folks.
True. But others rightly point out that technology is moving fast. Unreal Engine 5 modern tools, smaller teams can achieve incredible visual results now.
That's a fair point. And the footage, maybe it's not representative of every single second of the final game, but it could easily be a very polished vertical slice, A demo built to showcase the target quality and specific mechanics, not necessarily faked wholesale.
And that clarification from the director, that stuff since summer 2023, is in-game that directly tackles the fake gameplay claims, doesn't it?
It does. Even if, fair questions remain about optimization, performance across different hardware, and how much of the entire game will actually maintain that super high fidelity shown in trailers.
Right.
And the whole discussion around a potential Patreon demo, the specifics of the Mundfish deal, it just shows it's complex. The game's clearly being made, it's real, but the tension is between that incredibly ambitious vision in the trailers and the known challenges of actually finishing and shipping something that polished and demanding.
Okay. So we've got this picture, 2025, the genre is exploding with variety, games looking back, games pushing forward mechanically, aesthetically, and then ILL, this potential technical marvel that's got everyone talking both excited and skeptical.
Yeah, that sums it up pretty well.
But why does any of it work? Why are we drawn to games designed specifically to scare us? Let's bring it back to that psychology angle from the Cubics article.
Yeah, the Cubics piece really lays out the core idea as well. Survival horror is so effective because it taps into really primal hardwired stuff. The fear of the unknown is huge. Fear of hostile environments. Basic survival instincts.
Makes total sense. You drop into that dark fort in ILL or that weird village in Fragile Reflection. You don't know what's coming, what the rules are. Instantly triggers that old uh-oh feeling.
Exactly. And then the genre twists the knife by making you feel vulnerable. Limited resources are key. Not enough ammo, scarce health items, maybe few save points. It forces you to be cautious, engages you on a much deeper, more stressful level than if you just felt all-powerful.
Like having to decide in ILL, do I have enough bullets for this thing or do I need to run? Or carefully managing your inventory and flesh-made fear. The game design makes you feel that vulnerability the article talks about.
The article also brings up cognitive dissonance, that feeling of discomfort when things don't match your expectations. Horror games are brilliant at this. Misdirection, unsettling atmospheres, scares that come when you don't expect them. It keeps you off balance, reinforces that the game world is dangerous and unpredictable.
You think you know how games work, and then survival horror just flips the script. Keeps you constantly on edge.
And that suspense, that tension, it's built through all those little details, the environment, the eerie sounds, knowing you're low on resources. It creates this constant low-level fight or flight feeling. You rarely get to truly relax. And the article notes how developers deliberately play on common phobias, darkness, tight spaces, creepy crawlies, the supernatural, and use psychological tricks to make you paranoid, make you question what you're seeing or hearing.
You think about the creepy sounds in Be Crowned or the grotesque monster designs in ILL. They're aiming right for those anxiety buttons.
Yeah, which leads to some important challenges for developers that the article mentions. Like, how do you balance making it scary with making it frustratingly hard? How do you stay original when there are so many horror tropes? And finding that sweet spot between subtle atmosphere and just throwing jump scares at the player, that subtlety versus spectacle thing.
Right. Not easy to get right.
Definitely not. And the article points to the core tools developers use to achieve this psychological impact. Level design, making you feel isolated, claustrophobic, limiting what you can see. Sound design, using both noise and silence effectively for tension and scares. And art design, using grotesque imagery, shadows, light and dark contrast to manipulate your mood and hide threats.
So all those technical things we talked about, the binaural audio in Isla, the pixel art and tinnitus Somnia, they're all tools serving that psychological purpose.
Precisely. The article basically concludes that even though horror games might seem simpler mechanically than some other genres, they're actually incredibly hard to pull off well. Because success hinges so much on getting that delicate balance right. Mechanics, design, pacing, all working together to mess with your head in just the right way.
And it mentioned the rise of mobile horror, too, as an interesting side note, applying these principles on smaller screens.
Yeah, another sign of the genre's health and reach.
Okay, so wrapping this up, 2025 looks like a genuinely massive year for survival horror. The genre's thriving, it's diverse, we've got games digging into the classics, games pushing boundaries with tech, mechanics, art styles.
Yeah, a real mix, and Carol definitely stands out as a focal point for that ambition. The visuals, that brutal dismemberment system, the dynamic environments and enemies. It's generating huge excitement, but also, understandably, intense debate about whether they can pull it all off.
And underneath all the scares, all the systems, the reason these games work, why we keep coming back to them, it's because they're master manipulators of our psychology, aren't they?
Absolutely. Using every tool they have, design, sound, visuals, mechanics, to tap into our deepest fears and keep us feeling vulnerable, keep us right on that edge.
Which leaves you with a final thought, maybe. Considering how much effort developers put into exploiting our fears, what does our fascination with playing these games say about us? About that human need to confront, maybe even feel like we can master the things that scare us the most?
That's definitely something to chew on long after you turn the game off.